Hello, welcome everyone. I'm just rearranging my screen over here on the right. Thank you for joining us. We're here today for decarbonization of student transportation via electric school bus transition. And Joe Londa is here to share this with us. He's got an interesting simulation that he'll share with us. So just to let you know, I'm Rebecca Niles. You probably don't usually see me here. Fernando Redivo usually runs the seminar series, and I am filling in for him today. So it's nice to be here with you all. Want to just make sure that everyone's aware of our conference this year. We're finally making it to Bergen after 2020 when we were only there virtually in our 3D world. We hope you guys will join us. We have 540 people signed up, many of them in Bergen. So it will be a really nice opportunity for networking there. So definitely don't miss that if you can make it either virtually or live. We want to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Without them, we wouldn't be able to do things like host this seminar series and bring programs to you guys that can help you learn and network together. So we have a 1-hour agenda today, about 40 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes of Q&A. And you can use the chat for any questions that you have, and Joe and I will be monitoring that. So I'd like to turn it over to Joe, who has spent over 40 years working in technology at IBM and in HCL software. He now runs Gunk's Eco Lodge, a net zero energy fossil fuel free retreat in the state of New York, just a bit north of New York. Beyond his role as an innkeeper, Joe's deeply committed to environmental sustainability. He volunteers in his community to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and he also leads the Environmental SIG for the System Dynamics Society. Please join me in welcoming Joe. And I'm going to turn it over to him. He is going to share his screen and begin. Thank you, Joe.
All right. Thanks, Rebecca. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet.
Oh, maybe I need to reshare?
Yes, you need to reshare.
Yeah. Okay. How about now? Just go into screen show.
We got it.
Great. Welcome, everybody. I think you're here probably because you have an interest in a couple of different things. Perhaps, of course, modeling, system thinking, perhaps schools, students, transportation, energy, climate change. All those things might have brought you here today. So the title, Decarbonization of Student Transportation, the second piece of it, via electric school bus transition. There's lots of ways we could decarbonize without electric school buses, right? Walking, bicycles. But in New York State and lots of other places, walking's not going to be a large percentage of the students. Walking or bicycle is not going to be a large percentage of the students. We have some school districts that cover large areas, and so school buses are going to be the primary means of transportation. And in New York State, one of the things that's happened is that our legislators have adopted a mandate for school districts to fully transition to emission-free transportation by 2035. And that starts in 2027, with any new school purchase has to be emissions-free. So that may seem like a lot of time, but in reality, it's not. And that's in part because, well, we're talking about 731 school districts, which have about 4,400 public schools. Those are sort of the destinations for the school buses. And they have a range from urban, maybe they have very few very limited busing needs for urban, and then rural, where, yeah, it's the critical way that the students will get to school is through school buses. And it's approximately 50,000 gas and diesel buses. So, it's a It's not a trivial problem, that's for sure. What we've heard thus far from the school districts, especially those that in-source transportation, because a lot of school districts have also outsourced it, and so a third party is bringing the transportation system. But if you've in-sourced it, if you still have it in-sourced, there's a couple of areas that they have apprehension and they're not sure how to proceed. The three areas that I would point to would be, the first is battery range. And that's pretty classic, really, with any EV is, hey, how am I going to get stranded? Stranding students on roads is, kind of not a great thing. So perhaps the anxiety is a little bit higher there. Cost, that's obvious that cost is always going to be an area of anxiety. And there's really two cost elements here. The first has to do with the utility and the charging infrastructure at the bus depot. And the other is the electric school buses themselves. Electric school buses currently are about 2x the cost of a gas and diesel school bus. So obviously lots of anxiety around, hey, how can we afford this transition? And then the third item is whether or not they should change their transportation model. If they're currently insourcing, should they move to outsourcing so they can avoid this whole headache? Or should they find a partner who will do transportation as a service? And when you find a partner, that often means you don't bring the capital to make the change. You're just buying the service. The partner brings the capital. Or do you stay with your in-source transportation? So those are the areas of anxiety that they have, but they also want to understand the benefits of transitioning to electric school bus. What can that bring us? So the idea that we had to attack this problem is, hey, let's run a project to build a transition model, and let's involve high school students to do that. And we'll look at these areas of anxiety, and we'll look at a couple of different scenarios as well. Students, of course, are key stakeholders in the transportation. So they're a good individual to involve in the project itself. And they would be hands-on in developing the analytical model. We really wanted to burden them with it and give them new skills if they were not, well developed in spreadsheets. We wanted to look at a couple of different scenarios, and I'll describe what those scenarios were, but we wanted to show the sensitivity of the scenarios and, give school districts an understanding of, well, if you go down this path, it looks like this. If you go down that path, it looks a little different. Of course, we were going to need to request school district data to personalize each analysis for each school district. We wanted the students to present to the school boards because it's sort of a capstone project, right? And presenting to the school board would be a major accomplishment. And that gives them something for their applications to colleges and perhaps a source of a letter of recommendation as well. So that was the idea around involving the high school students to develop the model. We invited students, and we got 10 students from 5 school districts. They are near me. They're all within a half an hour drive of my location. One is a city school district, 3 suburban, and 1 rural. So that was good that we had some variation. We ran a monthly web conference. It was all remote, so there were no physical meetings. And in between the monthly web conferences, which we basically were using to educate and report progress, we also had separate meetings with subgroups on the different parts of the model. So a more intimate working environment as we needed them. We selected Google Sheet because there was no licensing involved. and everyone had it. Most schools, I should say in New York State, a lot of schools use the Google products. So the familiarity was a good starting point. I personally would have rather done it in Excel, but could have been any spreadsheet you wanted. The students wrote to the superintendents of the school districts explaining the project, requesting the data, because we kind of figured out what we would need first when we wrote the introductory letter, and then planning the time frame around when we were going to be done and deliver the presentation to the board. Because we were targeting having this completed for college applications and letters of recommendations, we knew we wanted to finish by January at the latest. So we contacted all the superintendents and said, please embrace this project. And well, we didn't quite get a strong embrace. And I think I'll describe why we didn't, or at least why I think we didn't get a strong embrace. But before I do that, let me describe the transition model a little bit. So we had some inputs, some basic information, demographics, and the meaning population of students. And then where are the locations, the schools themselves? What's your current fleet? And what's the current routes? We also had some reference data. World Resource Institute is collecting electric school bus data from school districts on what they buy, how much did it cost, what kind of bus was it. And so we used their data and brought their data into the model. Unfortunately, it's a static picture, right? So as they gain more data, we're not doing a continual update of their data, and I'll talk about an improvement later in that area. Two other reference areas: emission factors. That's so that we can calculate greenhouse gas emissions, diesel versus gas. And then we also wanted the prices for gas and diesel so we could calculate cost. The four scenarios that we looked at was like for like, and this means if you have 75 school buses, we'll replace them like for like, and including the sizes as well. So that is the least disruptive transition. Just convert your fleet as they currently are. And you can either do that with early adoption or late adoption. So though that was the first two scenarios, the next two scenarios were looking at the routes themselves and the population of students on those routes, and then trying to optimize how many buses do you need based upon routes and what size buses. So now we're really getting more into optimization of the school buses. I'm going to switch over to the transition model now. And let me get myself out of that. If there's any questions at this point, I'd be happy to take questions in real time.
I had one question about how you identify and again engaged students. I was just curious, given that you mentioned that you had difficulty getting the schools on board.
Yeah, so
on board, yeah.
We typically went through the science teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So most science teachers are involved in teaching about climate change and environmental issues. So, and also the math and the computer science teachers. So by going through the science teachers and being, very obvious that, hey, this could be something for your college application and a letter recommendation, that was the way to engage the students. We didn't go through the superintendents. And I would say it was pretty effective. Once we reached the teachers, who know their students pretty well, right? They could then decide who might be a good fit. Just an additional comment on that. I'm not a teacher, and so that was really a stretch for me to understand how do you work with teenagers. And I would have to say it would be better if we kept the teachers involved as well, because that would allow them to take it back to the classroom and talk about it. So we did this very much a separate effort from any of their curriculum work. And I actually think it would be better if it was woven into their curriculum and if the teachers stayed engaged as well. Partly because I'm not sure I'm the best teacher around. So having professional teachers involved would be able to coach me on how do you work with students. Okay. So this is the Google spreadsheet. You can see that 3 sections: inputs, references, and analysis. For navigation, we just added in a navigation tab, and it's all clickable, linkable. So locations, right? Where are you going to? I didn't fit. This is a sample spread. This is a sample school district, so I didn't fill in all the data. But you can see, right, there's an address, location, miles to the bus depot, start and end times, and things like, what is the grade, the lowest and the highest grade, which gives you some idea of who are you transporting to that school. Fleet inventory. So this is another input tab. This sample school district has 76 buses. And here they're all detailed out. What's the ID of the bus, what year, make, type of bus is very important, and its seating capacity, fuel type, estimated annual mileage, estimated miles per gallon, because that's going to be used to calculate the emissions. Is it in service or not? And here you can see on the very end in orange is 2 calculated fields: the greenhouse gas emissions and the cost of the gas or diesel that was consumed. So that's the fleet inventory. Another important input is the bus routes themselves. Every route has an ID. It has a mileage associated with it. It might have a time as well. Number of students on the route. Again, what bus is associated with that route. And then start times. This is an important piece. The way school routes are done is they sometimes have connecting routes. So you may pick up your high school and middle school as first. And then when they're done, when they're dropped off, you might then do an elementary route. So that's a connecting route. And in fact, what we found is that, sometimes there's even a second connecting route. So when that bus is going to go out, you have to have the battery charged to a level that it can run all of the connecting routes that it has, and then come back to the bus depot for charging. So you really want to know what is the total mileage for all of the routes that it will run in the morning and then in the afternoon. The rest of these fields are calculated fields, and we can look at one of the calculations is, what's the total mileage and what is the consumption of the battery for that initial route, the connecting route, or in some cases, a second connecting route. So in this line 109, you can see it had total consumption of 37.9% of the battery. Of course, what we did not incorporate is things like temperature. Temperature has an effect on battery consumption. Also, elevation change also has an effect on battery consumption. So, you know, first order effects here really didn't go into second and third order effects. So those were the inputs. I won't go over the reference information, although I guess maybe I should just quickly flash them. Emission factors. This is from the federal government, shows the global warming potentials for methane and nitrous oxide, and then the CO2 emissions for different fuels. We also collected from the federal government price per gallon for gas and diesel. And then I spoke about the World Resource Institute. There's a link in the model to their data. And what their data is, basically, what we wanted out of it is, well, what's the range? What's the battery range for different types of vehicles? What's the maximum capacity, seating capacity? And then what's the price? And a lot of school districts use this type C bus. These are the big yellow buses. A gas or a diesel school bus is about $150,000. So at $370,000, right? That's an expensive bus. And I'll talk, and one of the things that's in the model, and I might as well talk about it now, is the question of cost forecast. And this is why early adoption and late adoption is kind of important. Obviously, early adoption is going to reduce your greenhouse gases, what you emit, the most. As soon as you start to adopt electric school buses, your greenhouse gas emissions are going to start to go down. But you're going to buy the most expensive school buses. They forecast that there will be parity eventually, and no one really knows exactly when that parity is going to be reached. This model incorporates an assumption that by 2030, we will reach parity. And we think it's going to take 4 years of price takedown to get to that parity. We also know that that gas and diesel school buses are going to go up as well. So what is the reduction that's needed for parity? And this, we're saying, well, it's a 30% reduction. These are variables that you could change, and they would affect the outcome of the model. So I'll just show one of the scenarios. And the first scenario here is a route-based analysis with early adoption. So that means you try to buy the buses as soon as you can. And if you look at that curve, this analysis says, oh, starting in 2027, we're going to buy 10 buses. 5 will be type C, and 3 will be SUVs. And then 2 will be type A. So you can see this is the ramp up curve, basically, for acquiring the buses you need. And in this case, it happened to be 76 buses. And those 76 buses have a cost associated with them using that cost takedown curve. So this is, those 76 buses will basically cost $15.2 million. That's not including any grants or incentives. So it's using the world resource cost information and the cost takedown model that shows you, it says, okay, it looks like it might cost you $15 million to acquire 76 buses. The rest of this scenario looks at greenhouse gas reductions. Keep in mind that you're phasing your buses in, so your emissions are going to tail over as you start to replace, or basically your annual output is going to go down. It's basically going to go to zero when you complete the transition. And so at that point, you flatten the curve to not going to continue to increase. And so this is one of the important benefits is greenhouse gas emissions. Another key benefit is the gas savings, that you're going to spend less every year on gas or diesel. And then and because of that, you're going to have a cumulative savings. In this scenario, you're going to save $4 million in gas and diesel. Now, I didn't offset the electric cost in here. This is just the fuel cost savings. So it would be beneficial in the 2.0 version of this model to incorporate the electric cost into it. Okay. And then the last piece of analysis is the EV range. So this looks at all of the routes, the connected routes, and it examines what is the battery consumption. So we gave it a very high risk if it was greater than, I think, 75%. High if it was above, I think, 55, and then medium between 55 and 30 and 33, 35, and then low below that. So all of these are when you look at this chart and you see a slash between the IDs, that means this route has 2 connecting routes associated with it. So in total, between those 3 routes, V4B, 211B, and 413, those 3 connecting routes will consume 42.8% of the battery. And then you'll be back at the bus depot, and you can charge, and you can start to charge again. The reason why this is useful information is because it gives you some idea on, well, how many level 3 charges am I going to need versus level 2 charging. The level 3 chargers are the fast chargers. They're more expensive. So you really don't want to buy more of them than you need. And this gives you some idea of which buses might need to have fast charging. Or alternatively, for electric school buses, you could assign a different bus to go run, and after assign one of the buses that had very light use in the morning to an afternoon route that's a longer route. So you now get into much more of a optimization algorithm around which bus are we going to assign to routes. You know, bus drivers don't really like their buses to change, but you know, if you can balance out the consumption of the battery by pairing a short route and a long route and vice versa, that's smart to not to put too much burden on any one bus. So that is the model itself. I'm going to come back to the PowerPoint, and I'll just conclude on the model by saying, well, it's not as slick as En-ROADS, right? En-ROADS is a pretty nice visual model. This only focuses on the buses and not on the bus depot infrastructure cost, because you're really going to use this model to say, oh, okay, it looks like I need to plan for 76 buses, and I know how many level 3 and how many level 2 chargers I might need now by looking at the routes. So now you can begin to size the bus depot infrastructure changes. I already talked about the fact that we're not netting the fuel savings with the increased electric use. I've mentioned that the electric school bus survey data is static, which is not so great. And then finally, because it's a spreadsheet, it's kind of difficult to distribute it and control it. And we're not exactly sure, at least at this point, I'm not exactly sure how we want to distribute and control it. And it would be better if it was a web application, because then we wouldn't have to distribute it. And we'd have central control over it. So those are sort of the shortcomings of the model. I'll pause again and just to see if there's any questions. All right, I'm just going to keep going. So I did have one student who I hope to get on the call with us, but she was working, and I won't read this chart, but the biggest frustration that we encountered was that the superintendents and the transportation directors were not very responsive to the students. And I found that surprising. I would have thought that because it was a student asking for data and participating in a project, I would have thought we would have gotten much better engagement with the superintendent and the director of transportation with the student. And in some cases, we didn't even get the data from the school. And so we had some students who were very frustrated over we built the model, and some students were able to use it to analyze their district, and some students weren't able to analyze their district because they didn't get the data. Some of the data is public, but not all of the data is public. So we had some students walk away with a little bit of frustration, actually. And what I said to them at the end is, well, welcome to the real world. It turns out that sometimes, you can try to do good, and you might not get there, even though you have the best intentions of doing good. All right. So what did I learn from out of this? One of the things I learned is that a spreadsheet is not worth 1,000 words. Some people love spreadsheets. I've used spreadsheets my entire adult life. And so I can find my way around spreadsheets and see what they're saying to me by reading the formulas and just sort of understanding, what's in the spreadsheet. And what I found was that it doesn't give that holistic picture of the interaction of the parts in the whole and what the influences were. So I decided to try to build a system dynamic model, and I'm going to show that to you. It's kind of built on a storytelling, telling a story, because this should be for anyone, any adult or any kid, right, who wants to understand transition to electric school buses. If you're curious, it uses, and we'll provide the links here, or if you just do a quick search on Go.js, you'll find some examples of shareware, basically. I took that JavaScript shareware and then I customized it. And I'm going to show you what we ended up with. And let me go to it. There we go. So if you follow that link, it takes you to a web page. It's got a splash page, a splash pop-up that basically says, welcome. Here's what this model does. It gives the big picture, and it begins to explain things like stocks, clouds, flows, and influences. And it does that explanation in a piecemeal fashion. So if I step through this, first thing I would do is I'd show my stocks, and there's an explanation around, well, what is a stock? And how do you know what stocks you want to focus on? And in this case, I did colorize them a little bit to say, well, the yellow ones represent the school district, and the green one represents, the red one represents our environment and the greenhouse gases that are in our environment. So again, every time you click on a step, you get a pop-up that explains this, and you get to look at it and say, oh, okay, we've got 5 stocks we're interested in here. If I show the flows, again, I explain what are flows and how flows can take a stock up or down. And if I focus on one, right, for student population, well, rate of birth and transfers, you might separate these into separate variables because they are different variables. But the student population basically is the combination of births, which is going to be one of the primary factors in determining the kindergarten class, and then transfers in to the school district, and then you have transfers out, and graduation is the other key thing. And so those are the key valves that control the stock on student population. And each one of these stocks have that effect. And they all stem out of a larger system, be it community or school district, transportation provider, or the earth. So that's the basic stock and flows. And now we want to understand the influences, so we can start to look at influences. And if I scroll, let me move this around a little bit. Up top, you can see that, well, what affects the community? Now, normally, this is not following convention. This is not a formal system dynamic model. What we can say is the school district needs taxes for operations, it needs capital for sustainability, and the school district itself has a certain quality to it. How well is it being run in terms of, are the buses on time? Are the students on time? Are the students happy with their teachers and their performance? Are they doing well? The community, right? People move to a community because one of the reasons they move to a community is they like the school district, or they want to be in that school district, and they're intending to have a family. So if you're happy with your school district, it may be that birth rates go up because you indirectly are saying, yeah, this is where we want to raise our kids. You also, on the transportation side, the school district is, the school district is going to provide route schedules, start times, and a decision on what kind of model is it going to run. If it was insourcing, then the transportation provider is the school district. If it's outsourced, then that's going to be a partner, or rather a third party who you contract with. And I can add in other influences like, well, okay, I have the bus manufacturers and the government can mandate something. They can give incentives. Community has a certain cost for fuels, and the manufacturers set prices, specifications on the buses. All of that is taken in by the transportation providers to come up with the transportation plan. Yes, and you could use the spreadsheet to help you develop that transportation plan. That transportation plan leads to basically what investments are you going to make for the bus depot, and what purchases are you going to make for your bus fleet and chargers. So that transition plan changes your investment and your purchase plans for buses and the building. Finally, the greenhouse gas emissions. Well, if you put solar panels up, you are going to use less electricity. So if the electricity from the grid was coming from a fossil fuel electric generator, you'll use less. And if you buy electric school buses, well, you're going to use less fuel. That will reduce your fuel emissions, and you are going to use electricity. And depending on the source of the electricity, it may have an indirect emissions of greenhouse gases. Obviously, if your emissions are going up, and if the carbon cycle is not able to absorb all of those greenhouse gases, then you are increasing your stock of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And then finally, what that leads to is, well, there's going to be feedback from all of this. In the case of the Earth, well, extreme weather, right, is the byproduct of climate change. In the case of voters who are unhappy with taxes and incentives and mandates, voter dissatisfaction may change your representatives and thus change policy on how fast we move to decarbonization. Economics, are we saving money? Are these buses too expensive? Is it a profitable business to be in the first place? All of that will have a reinforcing effort on whether or not manufacturers are dropping their prices, increasing their prices, and how quickly do school districts convert to electric. So that's the storytelling model. I felt it was needed to go along with the spreadsheet. They're kind of disconnected in the sense that you can look at them individually. The transition plan is the spreadsheet. We built the spreadsheet first, and then we built the system dynamic model to kind of represent the more holistic picture of what's going on here. All right, and I think just about at the end here. So the outcome, what we found is that the school districts, I think, have a perception that volunteer work is not so credible and valuable. They're used to paying for things. So if they're getting something for free, they worry it's not any good. And no matter how much I explain, even if I explain, hey, my background, this is analysis is my background, their expectation is it can't be valuable if you're going to give it away. So that's, I think, part of the issue is you can't just walk in and say, hey, look at this. They don't want to give data away because they fear that it will be used against them. Somehow that they're doing something wrong, we're going to reveal that in the data. And so they cling to their data and they won't share it. I need more cycles of learning to see what problems we have in the model and what logical flaws exist. I don't know. I do have a list of enhancements that we're considering, but it's unclear if we're going to do a 2.0 version since data acquisition is a barrier. So at this point, it's unclear if we're going to proceed forward to do another version. I actually have a couple of students who want to do another version. So I'm tempted to try to do something, but I would need to be convinced that we can have an impact with it. The web-based storytelling, it doesn't follow real convention, SD convention. Perhaps there's some further refinement that needs to be done on it. And that refinement isn't necessarily matching the convention. It could be enhancing the storytelling, making it more accessible to the average person to understand it. And lastly, I just underestimated the challenge of working remotely and my inexperience of working with students. And lastly, that a physical meeting with the board, school boards, and the superintendent to commission the analysis, that's really needed. It's an important step. We relied just on email. It's too easy to ignore email. So that was sort of the takeaway. And I thought I would share this with everyone. And maybe there's some bits and pieces in here that is useful. And it does get to the larger question of, this is a local, school buses are a local challenge for a global problem of climate change. And so getting school districts to move faster and wanting to move faster is really the challenge here. The hope was that the transition model would do that. Thus far, I can't say it has made a difference, but I haven't given up hope yet. All right, so with that, I'll just come to the end and say, is there anything else we can do? Anything else that the Systems Dynamics Society can do to help advance the effort of decarbonization, whether it's specific to school buses or any other, transitional problem that we're trying to attack in the area of climate change? So I'd put that to all of the participants and really just a general question to, the organization as a whole, what more can we be doing? And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Joseph, I was curious, because you did the storytelling with the loop, and based on your presentation of the model, it looked like a lot of those loops were actually outside of the domain of the model,
Right.
but more about using that to convince, kind of help with a story of convincing people to move, using the model to overcome some of their issues. Just wanted to confirm that was true.
That is true. And I would say that the holistic came later. The transition plan was, okay, that's the first thing we did because it's just very numerical. And so it was easy to construct the numerical model. Whereas the holistic includes all kinds of soft, fuzzy feelings like, are you happy with your taxes?
Right. Danush, would you like to speak? You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi. I'm Danush from Auckland, New Zealand, just listening to this webinar. I just realized that, when I was an engineer, when I used to collect data, I used to get along and to get a good response, we used to always get up in touch with college students to get a better response from the local schools and areas. So I'm a transport traffic engineer and a systems engineer back in here. Yeah. So my question to you was, did you try to collaborate with any of these local organizations or the Department of Transport to get some data? Because what happens is they already have some models with them, which show origin and destination of the school trips. They collect these through maybe journey to education data or journey to work data like that. And that predicts how many students are traveling from this zone to the other zone and using what modes. And so that would also give you a bit of data that's like how students are traveling, maybe not on the actual buses, but maybe they're using other transport routes, modes.
So in New York State, if you were in a city, then the purchase of school passes to use the mass transit system, then the city would have that data. In school districts that rely upon buses, the state has knowledge of how many buses does the school district own, but we didn't find any source of data at the state level around the actual details of how the buses were being used on a daily basis. They probably have to report total mileage, but they really don't need to report what the routes are and what the miles are. So at the state level, Department of Education, their data is not granular enough to really get at the battery anxiety question. You really have to drop down to very local data to really understand, hey, this route is going 25 miles and it's picking up 15 kids. I don't think any of that data is pushed up to the state. At least not that I saw any evidence of. I did some exploration of what data is at the state level or the county level. And I found that it was really very aggregated information.
Okay. Thanks
And
for
just on relationship.
Yep.
So, you know, in New York State, I think there's 52 counties, and my county has 7 school districts in it. So I have a little bit of relationship with the superintendent here, and that made it a little easier to get the data and to have a discussion about, you know, what is the value of the analysis and what can you do with it. But once I left my school district, they don't know me.
Mhm.
And so meaning I have no relationship with anyone outside of my school district. And the students, drafting the students as my surrogate didn't seem to work. Which I think is really kind of sad in the end.
Mhm.
A little sad.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you, Danush. Martha
Thank
has
you.
her hand up.
By the way, Danush, I want to just commend you for joining from New Zealand. Thanks for
No
joining.
worries, it's fine. It's early morning, 6 o'clock,
Yes.
so it's okay.
Okay, Martha?
Excellent presentation, Joe. Thank you so much for this.
Thanks, Martha.
Yeah, I think of the value and plumbing for the full value of all of these kinds of presentations, which are in context. They're in these fleshed out domains. And I think that for me, when you ask the question, how should the SDS advance the effort of decarbonization? One of my answers is to consider trying to adopt a dual mindset here, where we are trying to promote the learning of things in context, such as what you've done here, but this whole below the iceberg, I guess, architect, below the surface of the water, where we're seeing these multiple rabbit holes now at the above the surface of the water, but there's this incredibly 7/8 region of generic thinking and capacity to generalize and cross patterns and trends, use these concepts as a language, and start to get into this other mindset of, well, how can I plumb this presentation now for its generalizability? What is common? You alluded to it when you said, well, this is a much less like version of En-ROADS. Could there be value in starting to think, well, how do I get a student to think about more precisely about, well, how does it differ from En-ROADS? And that's the exercise itself. Another example that you could compare this to is Alan Tukotsky's book, Now What? A Call to Action. I look at and I follow the progression of your presentation. I think, oh my God, Joe has just done what I've been looking for as an example to use in his book, Now What? A Call to Action, where he is brilliantly taking systems thinking, if you will, and going from a problem setup, a problem statement, a transition to, and he takes people right to the door of the question. Now, why would I want to now go into a system dynamics, stock and flow model? I'm thrilled, quite frankly, that you haven't put numbers on this, that you are in a conceptual era. You are using system dynamics. You are using not system dynamics, sorry. You are using the language of stock and flow that the system dynamics process using. You're using it for its linguistic capacity. And I think that's where a huge amount of transferability and generalist thinking has yet to be plumbed if we're really going to see patterns that are common, say in, I don't know, in a health presentation. I asked exactly the same question actually of the person. Now you've presented this and we're presenting ourselves in health here. How are you tackling the challenge of getting people to see the generalizability of this? And he said, you know, it's incumbent upon all of us who have these skills and we know about its generalizing potential to completely other, what seem like completely other realms, which are similar in patterns. So I would love to see the system dynamics societies start with all their presence to get out, to go from one rabbit hole to another rabbit hole. And how do we start to think? Because ultimately being able to think in this cross with this dual thinking in context, and then thinking in general capacities, we're going to get more system dynamics capacity to think of how to transfer, from health to the effort of decarbonization. That's the link.
I'm hoping that the pre-college SIG,
that
they will look at this presentation and engage in the question of how could we take this into the school and make this more as, you know, directly to the stakeholders and personalize it in a way that, you know, they can use as a teaching tool
exactly
that they're going to live with right in the future. So I'm hoping that the pre-college SIG and people involved in that SIG will engage me.
I can tell you right now, I was going to do that myself. I was going to encourage you to go seriously, right there. And the reason being also is because there has also been frustration that the participatory modeling branch of system dynamics and all kinds of system thinking, discrete events, all the simulations, the participatory modeling is not being recognized and shown to the teachers. And your example here is a fleshed out, brilliant example. They are going to gobble you up over in that. No, they really, really are. And if I'm going to emphasize to do this, because honestly, you are walking right through Alan Tukotsky's Now What? A Call to Action book. And this is a fantastic example where people are not going to be gun shy about, oh my God, you know, a simulation. Guess what? We're using it for its linguistic capacity.
Yeah.
And its transferability. That's where the transferability of system dynamics as a language, that's where it lies. And that's what takes it into participatory modeling. And you've done it absolutely wonderfully. You know, kudos to this. And I will do whatever I can to support and link you up to the education SIG. They will love this.
I see we have April's got her hand up. Hello, April. April, did we lose you?
I apologize.
No problem. How are we doing on time? Oh, so it's 3 o'clock. So we've used our hour. I know that there is another session on the calendar. I think the pre-college SIG has got an upcoming event as well. I'm planning to join that. And, you know, I do think joining up things, right? This area is pre-college, it's energy, it's environment, it's transportation. I think joining these things up and showing how they are threaded together is I believe, an important way to show the power of system thinking. And the modeling is just, you know, the visualization. I tend to be much more qualitative in my approach than quantitative. Although I think you could build a very nice, deep quantitative model as well. I'm not sure about the value of it, but I'm sure you could do it. At this point, the question is, how does the Board of Education and the superintendents, how do you get them enthusiastic about wanting to decarbonize via transportation or buildings? So that's the great challenge, I think, for us locally, and by locally I mean wherever you are.
Thank you, Joe. It was an interesting, thought-provoking conversation. I've captured a very simple loop here about, the need to, decarbonize buses, and that's being limited by the risk, and that there's the possibility of creating this balancing loop, which you did here, which is creating a tool which reduces the perceived risk. And together, those two balancing loops could make a reinforcing loop, which would be really exciting. So I think you're going down an interesting path, and I agree with Martha that this multi-solving concept, working with students, helping them think about it while trying to solve problems with the school is interesting. And I would love to see how you overcome the barriers to adoption in the schools, both of this tool or a similar tool.
Stay tuned. I'm not going to give up.
So definitely look forward to hearing that at a future conference. Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. We hope you'll continue
everybody.
to participate in these seminars. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Have a good day, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye. And I'm going to have to drop off very quickly. And I think that means I'm going to unceremoniously drop this because I do have another meeting following this. But again, thank you, John.
Thanks, Rebecca.